You ever think about like where these big ideas about how our minds work come from? It's kind of weird, right? Like a lot of it comes from these like really controlled settings.
Yeah, and that can lead to some real limitations in how much we really know?
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're diving into today, this idea of theme park psychology.
Yeah, it's a term that Sternberg and Grigorenko came up with. Basically, the idea is that a lot of the research and theories in psychology, they're built on this really narrow slice of like people and situations and the kinds of tasks they're looking at.
It's like trying to figure out like everything about the ocean, but you only study the fish in like a couple of aquariums.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And for our listeners out there, what we really want to do in this deep dive is like see how this whole theme park mentality can actually lead to some like pretty big misunderstandings,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about something like human intelligence,
Yeah.
like how we learn and all that.
Yeah, for sure. We're looking at this like super insightful paper that goes deep into this stuff.
Yeah. And they use some really fascinating research to make their case.
Yeah, cool. So to start off, can you kind of break down this whole theme park analogy for us?
Sure, sure. So think about a theme park, right? It's orderly, it's predictable, it's usually like a fun place to be, but it's also super restricted, right? Like the people who are there, whether they work there or they're just visiting, they're only like a tiny part of the whole population, and they're only doing like a handful of very specific activities.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So how does that relate to like the way we do psychology and education?
Well, a lot of times researchers, they end up studying what they call weird populations.
Weird.
Yeah, it stands for like Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So basically, your typical like college student who participates in a psychology study, got it?
Ah, okay, gotcha.
And they often ask these participants to do these very specific cognitive tasks, like in a lab setting, which is about as far from a natural environment as you can get.
Right, it's all very controlled.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that they then take the findings from these very specific contexts and try to apply them to like everyone. And they use those findings to inform things like how we educate everyone, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's a huge leap, isn't it? Going from like college students in a lab to like every kid in school.
Exactly. It's like you wouldn't try to understand how all birds behave by only studying the parrots in a pet shop, right?
Right, totally.
You'd miss out on like so much variation and adaptation and just the real world complexity of how birds actually live. And this paper is arguing that in psychology, we might be falling into a similar trap.
That's fascinating. So when it comes to something as complex as intelligence, what are some of the like underlying beliefs about intelligence that this theme park approach kind of leads to? The
Oh,
stuff that
yeah.
they're challenging in this paper.
Okay, so they really target three main assumptions about intelligence that are often just taken for granted. The first one is that the the small range of tasks and the very controlled testing situations that we typically use, that those things actually capture like the full scope of what human intelligence really
Okay,
is.
so that's the first assumption they're challenging.
Right, right. The second one is this idea that there's this like dominant general factor of intelligence. It's often called G, and it's supposed to be like the underlying factor that explains most of the differences we see in how people perform on cognitive tasks.
Okay, so G is like this overarching intelligence that's supposed to explain everything. Got it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the idea anyway. And then the third assumption is that intelligence, as we measure it with our current tests, is pretty much like a stable, unchanging characteristic.
Okay, so they're basically saying that we might need to like rethink our whole approach to understanding intelligence. And one of the ways they suggest doing that is through Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, right?
Exactly, exactly. So can I tell you a bit about that?
Yeah, please. I'm super curious about that.
Okay, great. So the triarchic theory basically says that intelligence isn't just this one thing, right? It's not just this single entity. It's actually a combination of like three main parts.
Okay, I'm listening. What are the three parts?
All right, so first you've got analytical intelligence, which is pretty much what traditional IQ tests measure, like your ability to analyze information, to evaluate things, to compare and contrast, all that good stuff.
Okay, so that's like the book smarts, the academic stuff.
Right, right. But then you've also got creative intelligence,
Hmm.
which is all about coming up with new ideas, innovative solutions, thinking outside the box, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about being good at school, it's about being like imaginative and inventive.
Exactly. And then the third part is practical intelligence, which is basically your ability to use your knowledge and skills effectively in real-world situations, like
Yeah.
how well you adapt to your environment, how you solve everyday problems.
So it's like street smarts, right? That kind of common sense, that unspoken knowledge that helps you get by in life.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like how to actually apply what you know and make things work.
I like that. It seems way more like holistic, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's actually looking at the whole picture of what it means to be intelligent, not just how well you do on a test.
Yeah, the paper talks about some really cool research on this practical side of intelligence, specifically something called tacit knowledge.
Tacit knowledge. Okay, what's that?
It's like the unwritten rules, the kind of intuitive understanding you need to succeed in a particular context, like on your job, for example.
Oh, interesting. So like the things you learn by doing rather than from a textbook.
Exactly. Like a master chef might have years of tacit knowledge about how to create amazing dishes that they could never fully explain in a recipe, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So what did they find out about this tacit knowledge?
Well, researchers looked at a bunch of different professions, from business managers and salespeople to teachers and even military commanders. They did studies in the US and Spain, so it wasn't just like a one culture thing.
Okay, so a pretty wide range of jobs and cultures.
Right, right. And what they found was that tacit knowledge is often a really strong predictor of how well someone actually performs in their job.
Okay, interesting. So how does that tie back into this whole discussion about intelligence?
Well, here's the thing. This tacit knowledge, this practical intelligence, it doesn't seem to be very strongly correlated with scores on those traditional cognitive ability tests, like the IQ tests.
Oh, so the people who were really good at their jobs, they weren't necessarily the ones who aced those standard tests.
Exactly. And that's a big problem for this whole idea of a single all-encompassing G factor, right? It suggests that maybe there are different kinds of smarts at play here.
Yeah, like different intelligences for different contexts. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it suggests that maybe our traditional tests are missing a big part of the picture when it comes to understanding intelligence. And that's where Sternberg's triarchic theory comes in.
Right, because it acknowledges those other forms of intelligence.
Exactly. It's not just about analytical thinking, it's about creative and practical abilities as well. And the paper actually describes a study they did with high school students where they used a much broader set of tests to assess these different aspects of intelligence.
Oh, cool. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so they looked at analytical, creative, and practical abilities across different domains, like verbal skills, math, and visual problem solving. And they used different formats, too, like multiple choice questions and essays. But the really cool part was that they also included some really creative tasks, like these things called counterfactual analogies.
Counterfactual analogies. That sounds intense.
They're actually pretty fun. It's like asking, what if gravity worked upwards? Or what if trees could walk?
Oh, wow. Okay, I get it. Like getting you to think about things in a totally different way.
Exactly. They're trying to tap into that ability to think outside the box, to generate novel ideas and solutions.
That's so clever. And what did they learn from that study?
Well, they found that these different aspects of intelligence, analytical, creative, and practical, they're actually pretty independent when you measure them in a more comprehensive way. Like, just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're automatically good at the other.
Okay, so it's not like they're all perfectly correlated. That makes sense.
Right, right. But here's the even cooler part. When they taught the students using methods that engaged all three types of intelligence, analytical, creative, and practical, their academic performance actually improved across the board.
Oh, wow. So actually using all three types of intelligence in teaching helped them learn better overall.
Exactly. And get this, the students did even better when the teaching methods were tailored to their individual strengths in those different areas.
So like matching the teaching style to the student's specific strength, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's all about recognizing that people have different intellectual strengths and then adapting the way you teach them to take advantage of those strengths.
That's huge for thinking about personalized learning, isn't it? Like that idea that not everyone learns the same way and that we should be teaching them in ways that play to their strengths.
Exactly. And it's not just a theoretical idea, you know?
Yeah.
The paper mentions other studies they did in different subjects and with different age groups, and they found similar positive effects when they used this triarchic approach to teaching, like with fourth graders in social studies and eighth graders in psychology.
Wow, so it seems like this could really change the way we think about education.
Yeah, it really challenges this narrow focus on just those analytical skills that are often prioritized in traditional schools.
Right, right. It's about broadening our definition of what it means to be intelligent and how we can help people learn effectively. Okay, so we've talked about some research done in the US, but the paper also dives into studies done in other cultures, right? Like really pushing the boundaries of that theme park analogy.
Yeah, and that's where things get even more interesting, I think.
Totally. So let's talk about the Kenya study first. What did they do there?
Okay, so in Kenya, they went to these Luo villages and they developed a test of practical intelligence that was specifically designed to measure the children's knowledge of herbal medicines.
Herbal medicines.
Yeah, like the plants and stuff they use to treat illnesses in their community.
Oh, interesting. So not like the kind of medicine you'd learn about in a Western medical school?
Right, right. It's knowledge that's passed down through generations, it's specific to their environment, and it's not something they teach in schools.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like practical knowledge that's essential for survival in their context.
Exactly. And the paper points out that this knowledge is actually used pretty frequently, like on average about once a week in these communities.
Wow, so it's not just some like obscure bit of trivia. It's knowledge that's actively being used to deal with real life health issues.
Yeah, exactly. And here's where it gets really mind-blowing. They found a negative correlation between scores on this test of herbal medicine knowledge and scores on standard tests of academic achievement, like in English, and what they call crystallized abilities.
Wait, negative. So the kids who did really well on this test of local knowledge actually tended to score lower on those Western style academic tests.
Yeah, that's right. And they even found some weak negative correlations with math and fluid abilities too, though those weren't statistically significant.
That's wild. It totally goes against this whole idea of a G factor, right? Like if there was one overarching intelligence, you'd expect those scores to be positively correlated, not negatively.
Right, you'd think that kids who were good at one kind of thinking would be good at all kinds of thinking, but that's not what they found. And it suggests that maybe excelling in one domain, like in this case, local knowledge of herbal medicine, might actually come at the expense of excelling in another domain, like Western-style academics.
Yeah, like those two skill sets were somehow competing with each other. That's so interesting.
And the researchers think that this might be because of how parents in those communities make choices about what kind of knowledge to emphasize for their kids. Like, they might choose to focus on either indigenous knowledge or Western education, but not necessarily both.
So it's like a cultural choice about what kind of smart is valued and prioritized.
Exactly. And it really highlights how our own cultural biases can shape what we even recognize as intelligence in the first place.
That's such a good point. Like, we might be completely missing other forms of intelligence that are valued in other cultures because we're so focused on our own Western definition of what it means to be smart.
Yeah, and that brings us to the Tanzania study, which used a really interesting approach called dynamic testing.
Dynamic testing. Okay, I haven't heard of that. What is it?
So it's a different way of thinking about testing compared to those traditional static IQ tests.
Yeah.
Instead of just giving someone a test and seeing how they do on their own, you actually provide instruction and guidance during the testing process.
Oh, so it's more interactive. Like you're actually trying to help them learn as they're taking the test.
Exactly. And it's based on this idea from Vygotsky about the zone of proximal development, which basically says that there are things we can do with help that we can't yet do on our own.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, how did they use this dynamic testing in the Tanzania study?
Well, they worked with these rural Tanzanian kids, and they gave them some tasks that are pretty common in Western cognitive tests, like these things called linear syllogisms, which are like logic puzzles and some card sorting tasks.
Okay, and how did the kids do?
At first, not so great. Their initial performance on these tasks was pretty low.
Oh, so they struggled with those Western style tasks.
Yeah, at first. But here's the really important part. After they received some brief instruction and feedback specifically tailored to the task, their performance improved dramatically.
So, just a little bit of help made a huge difference.
A huge difference. And what's even more telling is that their scores after the instruction were barely correlated with their initial scores. Like those initial scores weren't a very good predictor of what they were actually capable of learning.
So, those static tests were basically underestimating their potential, right? They weren't giving a true picture of what these kids could actually do with a bit of support.
Exactly, exactly. And to make things even more interesting, the scores they got after the instruction, which you could say better reflected their capacity to learn, those scores were actually better at predicting their performance on other cognitive tasks than their initial scores.
Wow, that's amazing. So it really shows that intelligence isn't just some fixed trait you're born with, right? It's something that can be developed and influenced by the opportunities you have to learn.
Exactly. And it suggests that static tests might not be the best way to measure someone's true potential, especially for kids who come from backgrounds where they haven't had the same kinds of learning opportunities.
Yeah, that's a really important point to consider. Okay, so we've talked about studies in Kenya and Tanzania, and they're both showing that intelligence might not be as straightforward as we often think. The paper also talks about a study in Russia, right?
Right. That one focused on how adults were adapting to really big social and economic changes, which is something we can all relate to these days, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The world's changing so fast, it feels like you constantly have to adapt. So, what did they find in Russia?
So this study was in Voronezh, Russia. They assessed people on things like fluid and crystallized intelligence, which are like different aspects of cognitive ability. But they also used a self-report measure of practical intelligence, like how good people felt they were at handling everyday problems and challenges.
Okay, interesting. So, they were looking at both those traditional cognitive measures and this more self reported sense of practical intelligence.
Yeah, and they wanted to see how these things were related to how well people were coping with all the changes happening around them. And what they found was that people who scored higher in practical intelligence, they also tended to report better physical health, less anxiety and depression, and a greater sense of control over their lives.
Wow. So, practical intelligence was linked to better mental and physical health.
Yeah, and while those more academic abilities also showed some positive effects, the impact of practical intelligence seemed to be even stronger.
That's fascinating. It really makes you think about how important those everyday problem solving skills are, especially when the world around you is in flux.
Yeah.
Like maybe being able to adapt and navigate those real world challenges is even more crucial for your well being than having a high IQ.
Exactly. The paper even mentions this example of scientists in Russia who, despite having really high levels of academic achievement, sometimes struggled to adapt to the new social and economic realities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you're used to operating in a very specific kind of intellectual environment, it might be harder to adjust when the rules of the game suddenly change.
Right, right. And that's where practical intelligence comes in. It's about being able to figure things out on the fly, to adapt to new situations, to find solutions that work in the real world, even if they're not the textbook solutions.
Okay, so we've talked about Kenya, Tanzania, and Russia. What about the Jamaica study? I remember that one was about health, right?
Yeah, that one was really interesting. They were looking at the impact of intestinal parasites on kids' cognitive function.
Okay, so not genetics, but actual health issues.
Exactly. They wanted to see if these infections were affecting how well kids could think and learn. And what they found was that the kids who had these infections, they did worse on tests of more complex cognitive abilities, like working memory and reasoning.
So it was affecting their higher level thinking skills.
Yeah, but they didn't see any significant differences on simpler tasks, like selective attention. So it wasn't like these kids had some general cognitive impairment. It seemed to be specifically affecting those more complex mental processes.
Okay, so that's a pretty direct link between an environmental factor, in this case, health, and cognitive performance. Like, it's not just about your genes, it's about the environment you're growing up in and the things that might be affecting your brain development.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is that even when they treated the infections and the kids got healthier physically, their cognitive performance didn't improve right away.
Oh, so it wasn't like an instant fix.
No, not at all. The researchers think that this might be because those infections had a cumulative effect over time. Like they might have been interfering with the kid's ability to learn effectively even before they were tested.
Wow. So it's like even if you get treatment later on, those early experiences might still have a lasting impact on your cognitive development.
Exactly. And it highlights how important it is for kids to be healthy, not just so they can survive, but so they can actually thrive and reach their full potential intellectually.
That's such a powerful point. Like, just having access to education isn't enough if you're not healthy enough to actually learn and benefit from it. Okay, so we've talked about how intelligence might be influenced by culture and by health. What about the idea that the very definition of intelligence might vary across cultures? The paper mentions a study in Taiwan, right?
Yeah, this one is really cool. It goes beyond just how we measure intelligence
Yeah.
and gets at the question of what do different cultures actually think intelligence
That's
is?
a big question.
Yeah, and what they found in Taiwan was that Adults there had a much broader definition of intelligence than what we typically see in Western cultures. Like they valued things like interpersonal competence, which is basically being good at understanding and interacting with other people.
Oh, so like social skills and emotional intelligence.
Exactly. And they also valued intrapersonal competence, which is about understanding yourself, your own emotions and motivations.
Okay, so being self-aware and having good self-regulation skills.
Yeah. And they also thought it was important to know when to assert your intellectual abilities and when to be more humble and step back, like reading the social situation and adjusting your behavior accordingly.
So it's not just about being smart in a traditional sense, it's also about being socially savvy and emotionally intelligent.
Exactly. And the paper mentions that they also found similar ideas in Kenya, where they have this really rich and complex understanding of intelligence that includes social qualities and the ability to navigate complex social situations.
Wow, so it really seems like our Western definition of intelligence is just like one tiny slice of a much bigger pie.
Yeah, and the paper argues that our traditional tests are really only measuring that one little slice. Like,
Mm.
we're missing out on all these other aspects of intelligence that are valued in other cultures.
So maybe we need to rethink not just how we measure intelligence, but also how we define it in the first place.
Exactly. And that's where Sternberg's triarchic theory comes in again. It acknowledges that while there might be some universal cognitive processes that underlie intelligence, how those processes are expressed and valued can vary a lot depending on the cultural context.
Right, so maybe there are some basic mental tools that we all have, but how we use those tools and what we build with them can be very different depending on where we're from and the kind of environment we're in.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like, we might all have the same set of Legos, but we're going to build different things with them depending on our imaginations and kind of world we're living in.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in. Can you kind of summarize the main takeaways for our listeners? What's the big picture here?
Sure. So basically what we've learned from this deep dive into theme park psychology is that our understanding of intelligence might be way too narrow. Like we've been focusing on a very specific kind of intelligence, the kind that's valued in Western, educated, industrialized cultures. But there's a whole lot more to it than that.
Right, and those traditional tests we rely on so much, they might not be capturing the full range of human intellectual abilities. And this whole idea of a G factor, like one overarching intelligence, might not be as universal as we once thought.
Exactly. And we've seen that intelligence is influenced by so many factors like culture and health and the kinds of learning opportunities we have.
Hmm.
It's not just this fixed trait you're born with.
Yeah, and we've also seen that practical intelligence, like being able to solve problems in the real world, is super important, especially in a world that's changing so rapidly. And maybe even more important, we need to be open to the idea that different cultures might have different conceptions of what it means to be intelligent.
Yeah, and we need to be really careful about making judgments about people's intelligence based on those narrow Western-centric tests.
Okay, so that's a lot to think about. But what does this all mean for our listeners, you know? Like, why should they care about this stuff?
Well, for one thing, it might make you rethink how you view your own intelligence and the intelligence of others. Like, maybe you're not good at traditional academic tasks, but you excel at practical problem solving or you have amazing social skills. Those are forms of intelligence too, and they're just as valuable.
Yeah, and it might also make you think about how our current educational system is set up. Like, are we really tapping into the full potential of all our students? Are we valuing all forms of intelligence, or are we still too focused on those narrow, traditional measures of success?
Exactly. And that brings us to our final thought for our listeners. How might our current systems, like in education and in the workplace, be overlooking or even misjudging valuable human potential because they're so reliant on these limited ways of understanding intelligence?
Yeah, it's a big question, but it's one worth thinking about. Like, what are we missing when we only look through that narrow theme park lens?
Yeah, and what could we achieve if we broadened our view of intelligence and started valuing all the different ways that people can be smart?
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.